The courtroom was silent, but the tension hung heavy in the air. It was a high-stakes case, one that could reshape the tech world. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur, was in the hot seat, facing a lawsuit that could cost his companies millions, if not billions. The plaintiffs, a group of powerful business competitors, had built a case that seemed watertight. If Elon lost this case, his empire might crumble. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. The room, filled with reporters, lawyers, and onlookers, was on edge. The judge, an imposing figure, scowled from the bench, eyes darting back and forth between the lawyers as they presented their arguments. Elon sat at the defendant's table, wearing his trademark black t-shirt and jacket, his eyes focused but distant. He looked like a man who had seen it all before, but there was something different today. The courtroom was tense. The clock ticked relentlessly. And then, suddenly, the silence was broken. A faint but unmistakable sound echoed from the back of the room. At first, it was barely audible, but soon it became undeniable. A soft bark. It was a dog. Everyone's eyes shifted to the back of the courtroom, where a strange figure emerged. A dog, a medium-sized, scruffy creature, had somehow slipped into the courtroom unnoticed. Its ears perked up as it sniffed the air, oblivious to the stunned faces surrounding it. The murmurs started immediately. Was this some kind of prank? Who let the dog in? What was going on? But before anyone could react, the dog's behavior grew even stranger. It was as if it was responding to something, or someone, on the other side of the room. Elon Musk, who had been stone-faced for the entirety of the proceedings, suddenly stood up. The courtroom gasped. Everyone expected him to speak, to explain himself, or perhaps to tell the judge that this was a misunderstanding. But instead, Elon did something no one could have predicted. He raised his hand slowly and made a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. A signal. A signal to the dog. The dog, who had been pacing aimlessly, stopped in its tracks. Its eyes locked on Elon as if it had understood the command. The entire room held its breath as the dog began to move toward him, weaving through the rows of seats with an uncanny precision. The judge, a seasoned legal veteran, couldn't hide his confusion. He leaned forward, his brow furrowed, and muttered something under his breath. The silence in the courtroom deepened. What was happening? Was this some sort of coded message? Had Elon Musk just communicated with a dog in the middle of a high-profile lawsuit? The idea seemed absurd, but the look of certainty on Elon's face left no room for doubt. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The world outside the courtroom seemed to blur into nothingness as every eye in the room followed the dog's every move. And then, the dog did something truly unexpected. It trotted up to the defendant's table, where Elon stood. There, in front of the entire courtroom, the dog sat down, looking directly at the judge. The judge's jaw tightened. This was no ordinary dog. It was like it had been waiting for a specific moment, a specific signal. Elon Musk's eyes never left the dog as he bent down to gently pat its head. The gesture was calm, deliberate, and, if anyone had been paying attention, utterly strategic. It was clear this was no accident. The judge, who had been watching this strange scene unfold, was visibly shaken. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. The dog's sudden appearance and Elon's cryptic actions had thrown everything into disarray. The tension in the room reached a fever pitch. "Mr. Musk," the judge finally managed, his voice stern but filled with curiosity. "What is the meaning of this? Do you have an explanation for what is happening here?" Elon looked up from the dog, his expression unreadable. There was a moment of silence before he finally spoke. "This dog," he began, his voice calm and measured, "is here for a reason. And that reason, well, it's more important than this trial." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, the weight of them sinking into the room. "I'm sorry if this is unconventional, but sometimes things happen in ways we don't fully understand." This is one of those moments. A ripple of confusion swept through the courtroom. What was he saying? Was Elon Musk implying that his dog was part of his defense? Was this some sort of stunt? No one knew what to think. But one thing was certain, Elon Musk had a plan. And whatever it was bound to be something far beyond the normal boundaries of a legal proceeding. The judge, now visibly perplexed, adjusted his glasses and looked back at the lawyers in the room. "We will take a brief recess," he declared. "Mr. Musk, please remain in your seat. Everyone else, please stay where you are." As the courtroom began to stir, whispers of confusion and disbelief filled the air. But there was one question on everyone's mind: what was Elon Musk doing? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. A voice rang out from the back of the room, likely from one of the many journalists in the crowd. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The question hung in the air, drawing the attention of the audience, many of whom had been watching in stunned silence since the dog's appearance. Elon Musk's influence in unconventional ways had always been a source of intrigue. But now, more than ever, it seemed like the world was about to learn just how far he would go to defend what was his. As the judge called for a recess, everyone in the room knew one thing for sure: this trial was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. And the real question wasn't whether Elon Musk could win the case, it was whether anyone would ever truly understand the secret signal he had just sent to his dog. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom had emptied out for the recess, but Elon Musk remained seated at the defendant's table, staring blankly ahead. He was lost in thought, his mind racing. His actions had stunned everyone in the room, including himself. The dog's sudden appearance, the subtle gesture he had made to it, none of it had been planned. Yet, somehow, it felt necessary. The room might be full of confusion, but for Elon, the signal to the dog wasn't just some random impulse. It was a part of something bigger, something much deeper than any courtroom drama could explain. But before the world could piece together the meaning behind the signal, they needed to understand who Elon Musk truly was. To understand the present, they had to look at the past. Elon Musk was not the typical billionaire. The media often portrayed him as an eccentric genius, a visionary who could shape the future with a single tweet or breakthrough technology. But there was much more to his story than the headlines. Elon had been through countless struggles, moments of intense doubt, and unimaginable challenges that had shaped him into the man he was today. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon had shown an early interest in technology and innovation. His childhood had been marked by both brilliance and difficulty. His parents had divorced when he was young, and his relationship with his father was strained, leaving him with a sense of isolation. School wasn't easy for him either. Bullied and frequently ostracized for his intellectual abilities, Elon sought solace in books and computers, teaching himself to code at a young age. As a teenager, he was already driven by a desire to escape the constraints of his environment. He had a vision, one that was bigger than anything anyone around him could understand. He dreamed of a world where technology and space exploration could improve life on Earth. But like many great minds, his dreams weren't embraced by those around him. His ambitions led him to leave South Africa and head to Canada at the age of 17, eventually settling in the U.S. to attend the University of Pennsylvania. Elon's early years in the U.S. were marked by both ambition and struggle. He faced financial hardship, living off of minimal funds and often feeling the weight of a world that didn't quite understand him. Despite the challenges, he continued to push forward, driven by his desire to change the world. In 1995, he dropped out of Stanford University just 2 days after enrolling, choosing instead to dive headfirst into the tech world. His decision to start Zip2, a software company, marked the beginning of what would become a series of groundbreaking ventures. He would go on to co-found PayPal, X.com, and, eventually, SpaceX and Tesla, companies that would cement his place as one of the most influential figures in modern history. But with great success came great sacrifice. Elon's personal life had been anything but easy. He had been married 3 times, with his relationships often splashed across the tabloids. His divorces, particularly from Tallulah Riley, were highly publicized, and his complicated relationship with his children added an emotional layer to his life that few people understood. Despite the fame, wealth, and accolades, Elon struggled with loneliness. The pressure of his companies, the constant media attention, and the endless demands of being a public figure weighed heavily on him. This emotional isolation, the drive to succeed at all costs, and the public perception of him as a mad genius, shaped Elon into a man who often appeared detached, enigmatic, and even aloof. Yet, beneath this exterior, those who knew him best understood that Elon was driven by something more profound than mere ambition. He had a deep-rooted belief that humanity's future depended on space exploration and sustainable energy, and he was willing to sacrifice everything to see that future realized. But it wasn't just about technology and business for Elon. There was one constant in his life that kept him grounded, a companion who had been by his side through the highest and lowest points in his journey. That companion was his dog, Astro. Astro wasn't just a pet. He was a symbol of everything that Elon had fought for, the pursuit of a future where humanity could survive, thrive, and adapt to new challenges. Astro had been with Elon for years, ever since he had adopted him from a shelter during a particularly dark period of his life. Astro had been a source of comfort during moments of doubt, a silent presence in the chaos that often surrounded Elon's personal and professional life. Astro wasn't just any dog. There was something special about him, something more than just a loyal companion. From the very beginning, there had been a strange connection between Elon and Astro. It was as if the dog understood Elon's every move, his every thought, his every need. It wasn't just coincidence that the dog had been by his side through some of the most pivotal moments in his life, whether it was the launch of a new rocket at SpaceX or the unveiling of a groundbreaking Tesla model. Over the years, Elon had developed a unique bond with Astro. It wasn't just the typical owner-pet relationship. They communicated in ways that went beyond words. Subtle gestures, a glance, a shift in the air, Elon had learned to trust Astro's instincts, and vice versa. It wasn't uncommon for Elon to rely on Astro's presence to guide his decision-making process, especially when things seemed impossible. In many ways, Astro was his emotional anchor in a world that often felt overwhelming and unpredictable. But not everyone understood the bond they shared. Most people viewed Elon's connection with his dog as strange, even eccentric. Some whispered that Elon was losing touch with reality, that his obsession with space, technology, and his dog was driving him into isolation. But Elon didn't care. Astro was his confidant, his companion through it all. And in the moments when everything seemed uncertain, it was often Astro who gave him the clarity he needed. As Elon sat in the courtroom, reflecting on his past, he couldn't help but wonder if everything that had led him to this point had been building to this very moment. The lawsuit. The dog. The signal. It was clear that something was unfolding beyond the simple legal battle in front of him. The dog's appearance in the courtroom, the subtle gesture that no one had expected, it all felt like a sign. A signal that was about to change everything. And just as quickly as the tension had mounted in the courtroom, Elon's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. It was time to return to the trial. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just another lawsuit. This was the beginning of something far more complicated. Something that no one, including Elon Musk, could have foreseen. As the door opened, Elon stood, knowing that whatever came next, he was ready to face it head-on, with Astro by his side. The brief recess in the courtroom did little to ease the building tension. When the doors reopened, everyone filed back in, some more reluctant than others. The energy was different this time. The dog's appearance had shifted the atmosphere. It wasn't just the fact that a dog had entered a courtroom, dogs had appeared in unexpected places before. It was the way Elon Musk had responded, the gesture, the signal. There was something deeper, something more deliberate about it. The room could feel it. Something was coming. As the judge took his seat, his eyes briefly flickered toward Elon before returning to his papers. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Musk, we'll continue now. Let's focus on the matter at hand." Elon, however, seemed unfazed. He wasn't even looking at the judge, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the courtroom walls. The dog, Astro, sat at his feet, calm but alert. It was as if the two shared a silent understanding, a bond that transcended words. The plaintiff's legal team was next to speak, and they wasted no time. The lead attorney, a sharp and calculated man named Stephen Carter, stood up, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Your Honor," Carter began, addressing the judge but keeping his eyes fixed on Elon. "What we have witnessed here today is not only an absurd disruption but a blatant attempt to undermine the seriousness of this court. Mr. Musk's behavior with this animal, whatever it may be, is irrelevant to the case at hand. We are here because of serious allegations of corporate espionage, negligence, and breach of contract. A dog has no place in this matter." The room was tense. Many of the onlookers were taking mental notes, their fingers hovering over their phones. The world was watching. Would this trial be remembered for groundbreaking revelations, or for a bizarre, unexplainable incident involving a dog and its owner? Elon didn't flinch. He simply leaned forward slightly, his eyes still distant, his demeanor calm. It was as though he had anticipated this. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice steady and measured. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, "I understand that you're upset. But the dog is not the issue here. The issue is something much bigger. Something that goes beyond this case. You see, I didn't bring Astro here just to make a point or to entertain anyone. He's here for a reason. And that reason is one you, and perhaps this entire court, may not be ready to understand." Carter's eyes narrowed. He wasn't expecting that. "A reason? Are you implying that this animal has something to do with the allegations we've made against you and your companies?" Elon didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned to the dog, his hand resting gently on the animal's head. Astro, who had been sitting quietly until now, suddenly lifted his head and looked directly at the judge. The room fell into a hush. The dog's gaze was intense, almost too intelligent for its own good. It was as if the dog, too, was aware of the weight of the moment. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but didn't speak. He couldn't afford to look weak in front of the public. He cleared his throat again. "I must remind you, Mr. Musk, that this is a court of law. Your personal theatrics may very well cost you the case. Do not waste our time further with these distractions." Elon sat back in his chair, his posture relaxed. "I'm not here to waste anyone's time. In fact, I believe this court is already entangled in a much larger issue, one that goes beyond this trial, beyond the accusations made against me. The future of technology, humanity's survival, it's all on the line." A murmur ran through the courtroom, and even the judge's brow furrowed at Elon's words. This wasn't just about corporate espionage. This wasn't just about money or intellectual property. This was something much bigger. And Elon Musk had just set the stage for a revelation that no one in that room was prepared for. At that moment, another member of the plaintiff's team, a younger lawyer named Sarah Rhodes, stood up. Unlike Carter, she wasn't as eager to escalate the conflict. She seemed to recognize that things were spiraling out of control, but she wasn't about to let it happen without pushing her own agenda. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice calm and even, "with all due respect to Mr. Musk, we are here to address the serious allegations he faces. The appearance of a dog, and the spectacle that followed, only serves to deflect from the gravity of the charges. We demand that this trial proceed without further interruptions." The judge nodded, clearly eager to regain control of the situation. He slammed his gavel, signaling that the court would continue, but his eyes lingered on Elon. There was something different in the air now. Something beyond the courtroom drama. The case was no longer just a legal matter, it had become a spectacle. Elon's team, led by his lawyer and close confidant, Jonathan Harris, quietly exchanged glances. They had been preparing for a battle, but no one had anticipated anything like this. The stakes had just become much higher. Jonathan cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor, I would like to ask for a brief moment of silence for Mr. Musk to fully explain his position. If we are to move forward in any meaningful way, we must first address the core of this conflict." The judge reluctantly agreed, and the room fell silent once more. Elon stood up, his figure commanding attention. He turned toward the crowd, toward the reporters, his eyes momentarily sweeping over them as though gathering the strength to speak the truth. "This trial, this case, is not what it appears to be," he began slowly, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of urgency. "The accusations against me are built on lies, deception, and an agenda that goes far beyond competition. This courtroom, this case, it's only the beginning of something much bigger." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on him. "The truth," he continued, his gaze never wavering, "is that the world is on the verge of a technological revolution. We are facing threats that no one can yet fully understand, threats that have the potential to destroy everything we've built. But there is hope. There's a way to stop it. And that's what this trial is truly about." Elon's words were heavy, laden with meaning that no one could quite grasp. The room was silent, except for the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional cough. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore. The lines between business and something far more dangerous, far more urgent, were blurring. The dog, Astro, still sat at Elon's feet, as though waiting for the moment when it would become clear. And as the murmurs of confusion and suspicion swirled around the room, one thing was certain, this case had taken a turn no one had expected. This wasn't just about business. This was about the future. And Elon Musk wasn't going down without a fight. The courtroom buzzed with a strange energy, as if the very air itself was charged with something unseen, something electric. The usual order of things had been disrupted. No one knew what was coming next, but everyone felt that they were on the edge of something monumental. And at the center of it all stood Elon Musk, cool and collected, though the tension in his eyes was undeniable. He had just thrown down the gauntlet with his statement about the future of humanity, but the full impact of his words had yet to be felt. The judge, visibly unnerved by the atmosphere, banged his gavel to regain control of the proceedings. "Mr. Musk," he said, his voice more stern than before, "I would advise you to stay focused on the matter before us. We are here to address the accusations against you, not discuss global conspiracies or your personal theories about the future." But Elon was no longer interested in appeasing the judge, nor did he care for the legal posturing happening around him. His mind was elsewhere, caught in a vortex of possibilities that seemed to be opening up before him like an endless horizon. He had already begun to feel the weight of the secret he had been holding for years, and now, the time had come to take action. As the murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, Elon knew he could not back down. He had come too far. It was no longer just about defending himself against corporate espionage charges, it was about revealing the truth to the world, a truth that would forever alter the course of human history. And to do that, he had to go on a journey, one that would lead him to places both within and beyond the courtroom. For a moment, his mind flashed back to the early days of his ventures. The first time he launched a rocket into space with SpaceX, the first time Tesla had unveiled a working electric car. The challenges had been insurmountable, the obstacles nearly impossible. But with every failure, with every setback, Elon had learned to push through, to innovate, to rise above. This felt no different. The world was watching, waiting for him to crack under the pressure, to stumble. But Elon was determined to succeed, not just for himself, but for something much bigger. A judge's gavel may command silence in the courtroom, Elon thought to himself, but it cannot silence the truth. With a final glance at Astro, who was sitting still by his side, Elon took a deep breath. He stood up slowly, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The courtroom went quiet once more, everyone's eyes on him. The dog remained calm, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Elon felt the pulse of time, the world around him vibrating with anticipation. It was time to reveal the next phase of his journey. "I know you don't understand what I'm saying," Elon said, his voice steady yet filled with an unshakable certainty. "But I'm asking you to trust me. The world is at a crossroads. A technological crossroads. And we are all connected in ways we cannot yet comprehend." He paused, glancing at the faces of the jurors, the judge, and the attorneys. The tension was palpable. His eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned the room, as if looking for someone, or something, he could trust. "We're not just dealing with a corporate dispute here," Elon continued, his tone now more intense. "What's at stake is far more important. Humanity is facing an existential threat. And this trial, this moment, is part of a much bigger picture." The room was silent. No one moved. It felt like time itself had stopped. Even the reporters, who had been feverishly typing notes, had put down their phones in rapt attention. The words Elon spoke hung heavy in the air. "Look, I know what you're thinking," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I know it sounds impossible. But the truth is, the world is changing faster than we can keep up. New technologies, artificial intelligence, and even the environment itself are pushing us toward a precipice. We can either adapt and evolve, or we'll be left behind." His words struck a chord with some in the room. They had heard the stories before, the doomsday predictions about AI, climate change, and technological singularity. But there was something different about Elon's delivery. His certainty, his conviction, it was undeniable. It was as though he had seen something in the future that they couldn't yet grasp. At that moment, the door to the courtroom opened, and a man in a dark suit entered. His arrival seemed perfectly timed, as if the universe itself had aligned for this exact moment. He walked directly toward Elon and handed him a small envelope. Without a word, the man turned and left, disappearing into the background of the courtroom as quietly as he had arrived. Elon took the envelope, his eyes briefly scanning the room. He could feel the weight of the moment. This was the signal. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He opened the envelope and pulled out a single piece of paper, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. The information on that paper was the final piece of the puzzle, the key to everything. It was the confirmation of what he had long suspected. "This," Elon said, holding up the paper for the judge and the jury to see, "is the proof. The proof that everything I've been saying is true. And I'm not just talking about corporate espionage or a petty business dispute. I'm talking about the future of humanity." The room was silent once more, the gravity of Elon's words sinking in. The jurors exchanged uncertain glances. The plaintiff's team was on edge, unsure of how to react. The judge's face was unreadable, but his knuckles gripped the sides of his bench, betraying a tension that mirrored the growing storm in the room. But the most surprising part of the moment came from Astro. The dog, who had remained silent through everything, suddenly stood up. He moved toward Elon, and as if guided by an unseen force, he sat at the edge of the defendant's table, facing the judge. The room's attention shifted to the dog, who seemed more present, more aware, than any of the people in the room. It was as if Astro understood the gravity of the situation, his gaze unwavering, locked on the judge. For a brief moment, everything felt still. The dog's presence, calm, steady, and powerful, seemed to hold the room together in a way that no human could. Elon's hand rested on Astro's head once more, as if reaffirming the bond they shared. The signal had been made, and it was clear now, this was not just about the court case. This was about something much larger. Something that no one could predict. The judge cleared his throat, though his voice seemed shaky now, as if he were grappling with the enormity of what had just occurred. "Mr. Musk, I don't know how to proceed with this. But I suggest we take a brief recess to process what we've just witnessed." Elon nodded quietly, his gaze still fixed on the judge. He knew this was just the beginning. The real journey was about to begin. The dog, Astro, sat by his side, and together, they had sent a message to the world, a message that would change everything. As the courtroom adjourned, the tension hung in the air, thick and undeniable. And outside the walls of the courtroom, the world would begin to ask questions, questions that no one was ready to answer yet. But Elon Musk had already made his choice. He had taken the first step on a journey that would change the course of history. And there was no turning back now. The courtroom was silent as the recess continued, but outside the walls, a storm of speculation was brewing. News outlets across the world had picked up the story of Elon Musk's mysterious actions in the courtroom, and it was already trending on social media. The dog. The envelope. The cryptic speech. People were trying to make sense of it, piecing together the fragments of information, but no one really knew what was happening. Not yet. Elon sat in his seat, his back straight, his fingers lightly tapping on the armrest of his chair. He wasn't in a hurry, but he knew that time was against him. The weight of the truth was heavy, but he had already made the decision. There was no going back. The only question now was whether the world was ready for the truth, and whether the courtroom, still reeling from the shock of the previous moments, would be able to handle it. Astro lay at his feet, eyes wide and alert, as though he was attuned to the unfolding events. Elon had always believed that the bond between humans and animals was stronger than many realized, especially when it came to animals like Astro. There was something more to the dog, something far beyond the simple connection of pet and owner. Astro had always been a constant, a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, there was balance. The calm in the storm. And now, it felt as though Astro was guiding him towards something even bigger than the courtroom drama. Elon's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the judge's gavel pounding against the wood, signaling the end of the recess. He stood slowly, feeling the eyes of the courtroom on him. The weight of the moment was almost unbearable, but he didn't show it. He had to be strong, he had to be the one to lead. As he walked back to the defendant's table, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The plaintiff's team sat in uneasy silence, glancing at each other, unsure of how to proceed. The jurors looked tense, their faces a mix of confusion, curiosity, and skepticism. The judge, though composed on the surface, appeared rattled, his eyes flickering between Elon and the papers before him. He had no idea what to expect next. "Elon Musk," the judge began, his voice strained but authoritative, "this court is still waiting for you to explain the purpose of your behavior here today. You've disrupted proceedings, and you've made statements that are, frankly, difficult to comprehend. If you have something of significance to present, now would be the time." Elon nodded slowly, his gaze locking onto the judge's. He could feel the eyes of the courtroom still watching, waiting for him to crack, to back down. But he couldn't afford that. Not anymore. He stood up, his posture unwavering, and turned to face the room. "You've all seen the envelope. You've all seen the dog," he began. "But what you don't understand, what no one understands, is that this isn't just a legal case. It's not just about business, or corporate espionage. It's about something far more critical. It's about survival." A murmur ran through the room, but Elon raised his hand to silence it. "There are things happening in the world right now, things that are being kept secret. Powerful people, organizations, and governments have been working on technologies that could change the course of humanity. But not all of these changes are for the better. And I've been a part of that world. I've seen what's coming. I've seen the dangers." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He glanced down at Astro, who seemed to be waiting, still and composed. And that's where Astro comes in. The room was dead silent now. The dog. They couldn't comprehend how a dog could be part of something this grand, this important. It seemed absurd, but Elon didn't care. He knew the truth, and he was ready to share it. Astro is not just a dog, Elon continued, his voice low but full of conviction. He's a signal. A part of a system, a network of technologies that have been in development for years. There are people out there who want to control the future of AI, of space, of energy, and they'll stop at nothing to do so. But Astro is more than just an animal. He's a key. A signal that will alert us to what's coming. To what's been hidden. The judge stared at Elon, as though trying to process what he was saying. The jurors were wide-eyed, their confusion growing, but also a flicker of understanding beginning to form. The weight of the moment was crushing. "Wait," one of the jurors spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "Are you saying this dog is part of some grand conspiracy? That it's somehow tied to world-changing technology?" Elon turned to face the juror, nodding slowly. "Yes. Exactly. Astro is part of a technology system that has been built in secret. There are forces working to create a new kind of artificial intelligence, one that can control everything from the internet to the global economy. But Astro is a countermeasure. A warning." The room was tense, but it wasn't just the tension of disbelief. It was the tension of something deeper, something stirring. Was it possible? Could it be true? "I know how this sounds," Elon said, holding up a hand to silence the rising murmur of disbelief. "But I'm asking you to trust me. The information I'm about to reveal, it's not just speculation. It's the truth. And it's the only way we can prevent the coming disaster." Elon's mind raced as he prepared to give the final piece of the puzzle. The envelope, the document it contained, it was all here. Everything he needed to reveal the full scope of the situation. But first, he had to prepare them. He had to make them see what was at stake. "Right now, you're all questioning me. You're thinking that I'm crazy. But I'm not. The people who are controlling this information, they're manipulating the truth. They're hiding it from all of you, from all of us. They want to control the world, to control humanity's future. And that's why I'm here today, to stop them." Elon's voice was growing louder, more forceful. The dog at his feet shifted slightly, as if sensing the rising tension. "This isn't just a fight for freedom. This is a fight for survival. And it's not just about technology. It's about who controls it. Who has the power to shape the future. And if we don't act now, we'll all be left in the dark." The room was silent once more, each person wrestling with the weight of Elon's words. There was no more denying it. The stakes had been raised, and there was no turning back now. The judge cleared his throat, visibly struggling to regain control. But even he couldn't ignore the sense of gravity in the room. The world had just shifted. What had seemed like a straightforward legal battle was now a global crisis waiting to unfold. And Elon Musk was the only one who knew how to stop it. As the tension hung thick in the air, Astro, the quiet and calm dog, gave a low, steady growl, almost as if in agreement. The dog's signal had been sent. And the real battle, the real journey, was just beginning. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law, it had become the battleground for the future of humanity. The silence in the courtroom lingered like a thick fog. Each word Elon Musk had spoken echoed in the minds of those present, leaving behind a deep sense of unease and a troubling feeling that things were spiraling beyond the realm of normality. His assertions, about Astro, the dog, about the technology that could alter the course of humanity, had shattered their perception of what this trial was supposed to be. A corporate dispute over patents, they had thought. But now, it felt as though they had stumbled into a larger, much more dangerous game. Elon stood there, unwavering, his gaze steady. He had said what needed to be said. Now, there was only the long silence that followed the shock, the questions that no one dared to ask. And yet, the courtroom's tension seemed almost to expand, pushing into the corners of everyone's mind. There was an overwhelming sense of confusion, and yet, amid the uncertainty, there was something else, the undeniable feeling that they had just witnessed the opening act of a much greater drama. The judge, still looking slightly stunned, cleared his throat. His hands shook as he reached for his gavel, the sharp sound reverberating across the room. It didn't bring the relief of order, instead, it seemed to confirm that this moment, this trial, had become something entirely different from what anyone had expected. "Mr. Musk," the judge began, his voice steady but worn, I can't say I fully understand what you've presented here today. But it's clear that we have entered uncharted territory. I am compelled to order a recess to allow both sides to process the information presented. We will reconvene tomorrow." Elon nodded, feeling the weight of the moment but resolute in his decision. He had said what he needed to say. And now, the world would have to catch up. As the gavel struck again, signaling the adjournment, the murmurs began, quiet at first, but growing louder. People were talking. People were questioning. They were trying to make sense of it all. Elon felt the eyes on him as he turned toward Astro, who was still sitting calmly beside him. The dog's presence was strangely reassuring in that moment. In the midst of all the chaos and confusion, there was something comforting about the animal's calm demeanor. It was as though Astro was the only thing in the room that truly understood what was going on, just as Elon did. And it was this bond, this unspoken connection, that gave him the strength to move forward. "Let's go," Elon muttered to Astro, reaching down to pet him gently. "We've done our part." The two of them, man and dog, left the courtroom together, stepping into the unknown. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was already in full swing. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and crowds of people gathered, eager for any tidbit of information. As Elon and Astro emerged from the building, the scene unfolded like a living, breathing organism, chaotic and unpredictable. But Elon remained calm, walking toward the car with purpose. His mind wasn't on the chaos outside. It was on what he had just revealed, and the ramifications it would have for the world. Inside the car, as the door slammed shut behind them, Elon allowed himself a moment to breathe. He turned to Astro, who had settled comfortably in the back seat, his eyes half closed in the peaceful way only a dog could achieve. Despite everything that had just transpired, despite the weight of the truth now hanging in the air, Elon felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was because he knew the journey had only just begun. Maybe it was because he knew that the world, as strange as it had become, would never be the same. "Everything is changing, Astro," Elon said softly, his voice distant, as though he were speaking to the dog, or perhaps, to himself. "And I don't think we can go back." The car pulled away from the courthouse, the city skyline looming ahead of them, distant and yet impossibly close at the same time. As the world outside spun faster and faster, Elon could feel the pull of destiny drawing him forward. There was no turning back now. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News outlets from across the world were clamoring to cover the story. The internet was flooded with questions. What was Elon Musk's secret? What did he mean about the dog? Was this some kind of hoax, or had he uncovered something profound? The media speculated wildly, but none of them knew the full story. None of them knew the truth. Behind the scenes, Elon was already preparing for what came next. He was meeting with trusted allies, those few individuals who had been part of the journey from the beginning. The ones who had seen the bigger picture and understood the stakes. Together, they began laying the groundwork for what would be the next phase of their plan. But even as he moved forward, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just the media. There were others, people in the shadows, powerful forces who didn't want the truth to come to light. They were out there, and they knew what he had started. It was only a matter of time before they would come for him. Elon's mind raced as he sat in a dimly lit conference room, staring at a map spread out before him. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the bigger picture was still elusive. He had uncovered part of the truth, but there was so much more to discover. And each new revelation brought with it more questions, more danger. Astro, as always, was by his side, his calm presence offering a quiet reassurance in the midst of the chaos. Elon didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the world. As the sun began to set outside the window, Elon made a decision. He was going to continue. He was going to see this through to the end, no matter what it took. The world needed to know the truth. And if he had to fight for it, he would. Elon Musk, he muttered to himself, his resolve hardening. You've been through worse. Now it's time to finish what you started. With a final glance at Astro, who met his gaze with those knowing eyes, Elon stood up and walked toward the door. The next chapter was waiting. And there was no turning back. The following days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late nights. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every move, every conversation, felt as though someone was waiting for him to slip up, to make a mistake. The weight of the truth was heavier now than ever, and it wasn't just his own future at stake. He could feel the world inching toward the precipice, teetering on the edge of something much bigger than a corporate lawsuit or a courtroom spectacle. This was about the future of humanity itself. The media frenzy over the courtroom incident had reached a fever pitch, but the questions remained unanswered. The dog, Astro, continued to be the center of attention. People couldn't fathom what connection a simple animal could have to such a grand, world-changing narrative. But the truth was there, hidden just beneath the surface. And it wasn't just about technology or power. It was about something deeper, something far more dangerous. Elon knew he had to act fast. He needed to reveal more, but in a way that would make people understand, not just believe, but understand the urgency of the situation. But even as he began to piece together his next move, something unexpected happened. A cryptic message appeared in his inbox. The subject line was simple: they know. His heart skipped a beat. Elon had known for some time that there were others, shadowy figures who had been tracking him, watching his every move. But this message, this chilling note, confirmed his worst fears. The people behind the scenes, the ones who had been hiding the truth, were closing in on him. He clicked open the message, his fingers trembling slightly as he read the words. We've been monitoring you, Elon. You've revealed just enough to make us nervous. But don't think for a second that you're in control. We know about Astro. We know about the signal. And we know what's at stake. The message continued with a vague warning: if you proceed any further, there will be consequences. This is bigger than you, bigger than anyone. There's a reason why some secrets are meant to stay buried. Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Who could have sent this? Who was watching him so closely? The threat felt real, and it only heightened the urgency of what he had to do next. Who would send something like this? He murmured to himself. Astro, as always, was right by his side. The dog sat at the foot of Elon's chair, gazing up at him with an almost knowing look in his eyes. It was as if Astro was aware of the danger, aware that the stakes had just been raised. Elon's phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a call from one of his most trusted colleagues, Zoe, who had been working alongside him for years. He picked up immediately. Elon, Zoe's voice was urgent. We need to talk. It's about the message you received. Elon's pulse quickened. What do you know about it? There's more at play here than you realize, Zoe said, her voice tight. I've been digging into the people who've been shadowing your every move. They're not just some corporate players. They're linked to a global network of elites who have been pulling strings behind the scenes for decades. They've been using advanced AI technology to manipulate everything from financial markets to political systems. And Astro, he's not just a key. He's the one thing they're afraid of. Elon felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was bigger than he had thought. Much bigger. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Astro's the signal, Elon said softly. He's the one who can alert us to their presence, to their control. That's right, Zoe confirmed. They've been tracking him, monitoring his movements. And the moment you revealed the connection between him and the signal, you put yourself on their radar. Now, they're not just after you. They're after everything you know. Elon could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had thought that unveiling the truth in the courtroom had been the hardest part, but now he understood that the real battle was only just beginning. The world wasn't ready for this kind of truth. No one would believe it without proof. And proving it, proving the existence of this global network, would be the most dangerous thing he had ever done. I need to see the files, Elon said, his voice resolute. All of them. Every piece of information you've gathered. We need to be ready. Zoe paused. Elon, be careful. The more you dig, the more they'll come for you. You're not just up against a corporation anymore. You're up against an entire system. And they don't play fair. I don't have a choice, Elon replied. I have to keep moving forward. The truth has to come out. The world needs to know what's happening. With that, the conversation ended. Elon sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. His mind was spinning, but one thing was clear, the time for subtlety was over. He had to go public. He had to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Elon's gaze shifted to Astro, who was still sitting quietly at his feet. The dog's calm presence was a strange comfort in the midst of this storm. They were in this together, for better or worse. And whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The next day, Elon called a press conference. The media had been clamoring for answers, and now, he would give them some, though not all. He wasn't ready to reveal everything. But he couldn't just sit back and wait. The world needed a spark, a reason to believe. As the press room filled with reporters and cameras, Elon stood behind the podium, his expression firm. He didn't smile, but his presence alone commanded attention. Thank you for coming, he began. I'm here today to share a truth that I believe is far greater than anything any of you might have expected. What's happening in this world right now is not just a question of technology. It's a question of control. There are those who want to shape the future of humanity for their own benefit. But there's something they're not counting on. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. There's a signal. A warning system. And it's being broadcast to us through an unexpected source. A dog. A companion. And what this dog represents could be the key to stopping those who want to control us all. The room fell silent. The reporters exchanged looks, unsure whether this was just another eccentric Musk moment or the beginning of something much more profound. But Elon stood tall, undeterred. This is bigger than me, he continued, his voice steady. It's bigger than anyone. And I'm asking you to listen. The future of humanity depends on it. And as the press conference ended, one thing was certain, the world had just been thrust into a battle they weren't prepared for. And Elon Musk had just become the unlikely leader of a movement that could change the course of history. But with that title came a price. And the true cost of the truth was yet to be paid. Astro, ever faithful, stood at his side. And the journey had only just begun. The press conference had sent shockwaves across the globe. The media circus surrounding Elon Musk's revelation of Astro, the seemingly ordinary dog with extraordinary implications, was just beginning to gain momentum. It was the kind of moment that turned the ordinary world upside down, shaking the foundations of everything people thought they knew about power, control, and the future. Elon knew that the days ahead would be filled with intense scrutiny, skepticism, and, most importantly, danger. The global elites, the powerful network who had kept their manipulative grip on humanity hidden for so long, would not sit idly by. The world might be waking up to the possibility of a hidden conspiracy, but that same world was also waking up to a new threat, the truth. And when the truth is exposed, there are always those who will go to extreme lengths to silence it. Elon sat in his private office late into the night, his laptop open in front of him. Zoe's call from earlier had given him a deeper understanding of the network that had been operating behind the scenes for decades, but it had also made one thing clear: they were not only watching him, they were watching every single move he made. The power and influence of the global elites were vast. They controlled corporations, governments, and even the flow of information. But they had underestimated one thing: Astro. The dog had been more than just a companion to Elon. Astro was the key to breaking open the very system that kept this powerful network in control. Astro's presence, his ability to communicate through an encrypted signal, was the one thing that could bring everything crashing down. It was this connection, the dog and the signal, that could dismantle the global network. But the stakes were high. Too high. Elon glanced down at Astro, who was lying at his feet, his eyes calm but alert. The dog had no idea of the role he was playing in a much larger story. But Elon understood that Astro was more than just an innocent bystander. The dog was a signal of hope in a world that had been manipulated for too long. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He glanced up to see Zoe standing in the doorway, her expression serious. She didn't need to say anything. Elon could see the urgency in her eyes. He motioned for her to come in. "I've compiled everything I could find," Zoe said, placing a thick folder on the desk in front of him. "But there's more. We need to meet with the others. We're running out of time." Elon nodded, his mind already racing through the possibilities. The others, those who had been working in the shadows to uncover the truth, were key to taking down the network. He knew he couldn't do this alone. The truth was bigger than just him. It was about everyone who had been manipulated, controlled, and deceived by those in power. "I'm ready," Elon said, standing up. He reached for the folder and began flipping through the pages. Each document, each piece of information, painted a more disturbing picture of the network's operations. These were not just faceless corporations or faceless people in government. They were connected in ways that were deeply ingrained into the fabric of society. "There are sleeper agents everywhere," Zoe explained. "People in positions of power who are working in the shadows to keep this whole system intact. They control information, resources, even the very flow of capital." And Astro's signal? It's not just a message. It's a beacon. It's a threat to everything they've worked for. Elon stopped on a page detailing a massive covert project that involved manipulating global economies through AI-driven financial systems. The more he read, the more it became clear that the elites had been using advanced technologies to shape world events and ensure their dominance. Every market crash, every political scandal, every war, it had all been part of a larger design. "We need to expose this," Elon said quietly, his mind racing with the implications. "We need to expose them all." "But it's not going to be easy," Zoe cautioned. "They have eyes everywhere. They'll try to discredit you, make you look insane. You're already on their radar. They know you're on to them." Elon knew the risks, but the truth was undeniable. The world was teetering on the brink, and if he didn't act now, the network's control would only tighten. He couldn't let them win. Not when so many people's futures were at stake. "We'll have to be strategic," Elon said. "We need to gather all the evidence, all the support we can, before we make our next move. And we'll have to use Astro's signal to our advantage. If we can tap into it, we can track their every move." Zoe nodded, clearly on the same page. "I've been working on a plan. It's risky, but it might be our best shot. We need to gain access to their data centers. That's where the real control is." Elon's heart quickened. "And how do you propose we do that?" Zoe leaned in, her voice lowering. "We need to get to their headquarters, somewhere secure, somewhere they never think anyone would go. But we'll need to be careful. They'll be prepared for an attack, and if we don't act fast, we'll be playing right into their hands. Then we need to move quickly, Elon said, determination flooding his veins. But we can't do it alone. We'll need to rally the others, people who understand the stakes and are willing to risk everything. Zoe hesitated. Are you sure about this, Elon? Once we start, there's no going back. We're not just fighting for information anymore. We're fighting for the future of the world. Elon glanced down at Astro, who was now standing at his feet, his head tilted in that familiar way dogs do when they sense something important. It was as if the dog knew what was coming next. I'm sure, Elon said, his voice resolute. It's time to end this. The truth is out there, and we're going to find it. Together. With that, they began to prepare. The network that had controlled the world from the shadows would no longer hold the reins. Elon, Zoe, and the others would be their undoing. But even as they made their plans, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous part of this journey was just beginning. He wasn't just up against a powerful corporation anymore. He was up against a system that had been carefully built and maintained for centuries. And that system wasn't about to fall easily. The night stretched on, and Elon's mind raced with strategies, risks, and possible outcomes. But one thing was clear, he couldn't stop now. The truth had to come out. The world needed to know what had been hidden for so long. And with Astro by his side, he knew they had a chance. They just had to survive long enough to expose the real enemy. The tension in the air was palpable as Elon and Zoe sat in the dimly lit conference room. The plan had been set in motion, but the reality of what they were about to do was slowly sinking in. The task before them was enormous, and the risks were greater than anything they had ever faced before. But the path was clear now, and there was no turning back. We need to move fast, Zoe said, leaning forward, her eyes locked on Elon's. The longer we wait, the more chances they have to cover their tracks. We don't have the luxury of time. Elon nodded grimly. I know. But we can't just throw ourselves into this blindly. We need to make sure we have all the right resources, all the right people in place before we make the first move. Zoe opened her laptop and tapped a few keys. On the screen, a list of names popped up, people who had been working with them behind the scenes for months. Each person on the list had a different skill set, from tech experts to former intelligence officers. It was a small, but highly trained team. Still, it was a team they could trust. We've already initiated some initial contact, Zoe continued. They're ready. But we need to get the information to them without being traced. This is a global operation we're taking on, and we need to keep everything encrypted, everything compartmentalized. Elon thought about the message he'd received a few days ago, they know. Whoever they were, they had eyes on him. If they were as powerful as Zoe suspected, every move, every plan, was being watched. That realization added another layer of urgency to the situation. Do we have access to the data center? Elon asked, his mind already racing through the logistics. Zoe grimaced. Not yet. The data center is located in a remote location. It's well protected, but we've been able to hack into their surveillance feeds and get a blueprint of the place. The real challenge will be getting in without setting off alarms. Elon exhaled slowly. He'd never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was different. The stakes weren't just about money or power anymore. This was a fight for control over the very future of humanity. I'll need to go in personally, Elon said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. If we can't trust anyone else, we need to make sure the right people have the information firsthand. Zoe shot him a concerned look. Elon, you can't do this alone. You've already put yourself in the line of fire by making that public statement. You can't afford to be the face of this operation anymore. But Elon shook his head. If we're going to pull this off, it has to be me. The elites know me, they'll expect a major figure like me to be involved. If we do this right, we can use the element of surprise. And with Astro's signal, we'll have the upper hand. Zoe remained silent for a moment before nodding reluctantly. Fine. But we're going to need more than just Astro's signal. We need to make sure that they don't trace our every move. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, no larger than a deck of cards. I've got something that might help, he said, placing the device on the table. It was a high-tech, self-made piece of equipment, an AI-enhanced decryption tool he had been working on in secret. It was capable of hacking into secure networks without leaving a trace, something Elon had developed during his spare time. Zoe stared at the device, impressed. I didn't even know you had this in the works. This could change everything. Elon smiled slightly. Sometimes the best ideas come when you're not looking for them. This is our key to bypassing their security systems. Once we get inside, we can gather everything we need. All right, Zoe said, standing up and gathering the files. Then it's settled. We go in tomorrow. We move quickly, gather the intel, and get out before they know what hit them. Elon's heart raced. Tomorrow was the day they would make their first strike. The first step in dismantling the network that had held the world in its grip for so long. It felt almost surreal. But the danger was real, and with every step, they would only be getting closer to the truth. The next day, Elon and Zoe, along with a small team of trusted individuals, began their journey toward the secret data center. They had planned their route meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. Every step was calculated, every contingency planned for. The hours spent preparing had made them hyper-aware of the dangers that lay ahead. Elon was dressed in plain clothes, nothing too flashy or attention-grabbing. Zoe, who was always practical, wore a simple black hoodie and cargo pants. Their mission was not to stand out. The less attention they drew, the better. As they approached the facility, Elon's mind drifted back to Astro. The dog was back at his home, waiting. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that Astro was more than just a symbol, he was the key. The signal, the dog, the connection, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle that was slowly coming together. Once they arrived at the perimeter of the data center, they quickly slipped into position. The facility was heavily guarded, but Zoe had already set up a series of distractions to divert attention. With their plan in motion, they began infiltrating the outer defenses. As they moved through the darkened corridors, the quiet hum of the facility's security systems echoed around them. Every door, every hallway, every checkpoint was monitored. But Elon's device, the one he'd created in secret, was performing flawlessly. They moved past security cameras and laser grids, unseen and undetected. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the heart of the facility, the central control room. It was here that the most sensitive data was stored. The secrets that had been hidden for years were within their grasp. Elon stood at the door, taking a deep breath. "This is it," he said softly. Zoe glanced at him, her eyes filled with resolve. "Let's get to work." Inside, rows of servers hummed, their lights blinking steadily. Elon set to work, connecting his decryption device to the main terminal. Within seconds, the data began to flow, and the encrypted files began unlocking. But just as they started to access the information, a sound broke the silence, footsteps approaching. Their time was running out. "Get the data, now." Zoe hissed. Elon's fingers flew across the keyboard, his heart pounding. They were so close. He had no idea how much time they had left. Would they make it out in time? Could they escape before the alarm sounded? The door to the control room creaked open, and Elon's breath caught in his throat. The next few moments would decide everything. "Move," Zoe whispered urgently. But it was too late. They were caught. The first strike had failed. And now, they would have to fight their way out. The mission had just begun, but it had already hit a dangerous turning point. The chase was on. And now, more than ever, the world would find itself on the brink of a new and unexpected conflict, one that would shake everything to its core. The pieces were falling into place, but the ultimate test was still ahead. The screeching of metal echoed through the hallway as the door swung open, revealing a group of heavily armed security guards. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he quickly turned to Zoe, who was already reaching for the device, prepared for the worst. The plan had always been to slip in and out undetected, but the best-laid plans often fell apart in the face of real danger. "Go!" Zoe shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Without a second thought, Elon grabbed the encrypted data from the terminal and shoved it into his bag. Zoe, her movements swift and calculated, activated a small explosive device that she'd planted on one of the security cameras earlier. It exploded in a shower of sparks, momentarily blinding the guards and giving them a window to escape. "Elon, move!" Zoe hissed, already sprinting toward the narrow corridor they had entered through. Elon was right behind her, his mind racing. They were already deep inside the heart of the enemy's stronghold, and now the real test had begun. The facility was large, but it was also labyrinthine, and finding an exit would be no easy task. As they bolted down the corridor, the sound of alarms began blaring, the facility now fully aware of their presence. "They'll have the entire building on lockdown in minutes," Zoe said, her voice strained as she sprinted ahead. Elon nodded, pushing himself harder to keep up. "We need to get to the lower levels. That's where the emergency exits are. There's a hidden tunnel under the facility that'll take us to the surface." The further they ran, the more the sound of approaching footsteps echoed behind them. Security guards were closing in. Elon's mind whirred, considering their options. They had no backup, no time to waste. This mission was quickly spiraling out of control, but there was no turning back now. The information they had extracted was worth the risk, it could bring down the entire system. "We can't outrun them forever," Elon muttered, glancing over his shoulder. The guards were getting closer. Zoe didn't respond right away but instead reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a detonator. "We don't need to outrun them," she said grimly. "We just need to stop them for a while." With a swift motion, she pressed the button, and a series of explosive charges placed throughout the building detonated. The sound of the blasts was deafening, and the walls shook violently. The ground beneath their feet trembled, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. The security guards behind them stumbled, momentarily disoriented by the shockwave. "Elon, now!" Zoe shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. They continued to sprint, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. The sound of the alarm still rang in their ears, but now there was a new noise, the distinct rumble of a door sliding open in the distance. "There it is," Elon said, pointing toward a large steel door at the end of the hall. "The emergency exit. They could make it." But before they could reach it, more guards appeared from around the corner, their weapons raised. They had nowhere to go. "Elon!" Zoe yelled, shoving him toward a nearby alcove. Elon didn't hesitate. He slid into the alcove, pulling Zoe along with him. They crouched low, trying to stay out of sight as the guards jogged past them, unaware of their position. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elon's breath was coming in short, sharp bursts. His mind raced, thinking of their next move. How long until the next round of reinforcements arrive? Elon whispered, his eyes scanning the hallway. 2 minutes, maybe less, Zoe replied. She looked at her wrist, where a small device tracked the movements of the security teams. "They're mobilizing the backup now. We need to move quickly." They waited in the shadows, listening as the guards passed. The seconds felt like hours. Elon could hear his heartbeat in his ears, each thud sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. "Ready?" Zoe asked, her voice low. Elon nodded, his mind focused. "Let's go." They darted from their hiding spot, moving as quickly and silently as possible. They had only one chance to make it to the exit. If they didn't, they would be trapped in the facility, with no way to escape and no way to get the data they had risked everything for. As they reached the exit door, Zoe quickly checked the security system, bypassing the controls with a series of fast keystrokes. The door clicked open just as reinforcements rounded the corner. "Move!" Zoe shouted, as the two of them burst through the door into the cold night air. The night sky above them was dark and unforgiving, but the silence felt like a temporary relief from the chaos inside the facility. They were outside, but the danger was far from over. The guards would be mobilizing quickly, and it wouldn't be long before they started searching for them. Their escape had only just begun. "There's a car parked a few miles from here," Zoe said, pulling Elon towards a narrow alley. "We need to get to it before they lock down the roads." Elon nodded, his mind still focused on the data they had secured. "We have the evidence. Now, we need to make sure it reaches the right people." Zoe didn't respond immediately but instead kept her pace steady, eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of pursuit. They moved quickly, staying low, ducking behind dumpsters and alleyways as they made their way toward the rendezvous point. As they approached the car, a low rumble filled the air. Elon turned around just in time to see several black SUVs pulling into the alley from the far end. They were closing in fast. "They found us," Zoe said, her voice grim. "We don't have much time." Elon yanked open the car door, and Zoe jumped into the driver's seat without hesitation. Elon quickly slid into the passenger side, just as the sound of screeching tires and gunfire erupted behind them. "Go!" Elon shouted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Zoe slammed her foot on the accelerator, and the car shot forward, narrowly avoiding the incoming bullets that punctured the night air. As the tires screeched, the car raced down the alley, narrowly missing the SUV that had blocked the entrance. The chase had begun. The world was after them now. "We've got one shot at this," Zoe said, keeping her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "If we make it to the safe house, we can regroup, but until then, we need to stay ahead of them." Elon's fingers tightened around the seat as the car sped through the city streets. His mind raced. What had they just unleashed? The data, the hidden secrets of the global elites, it was all in their hands now. But at what cost? They could feel the weight of the world bearing down on them. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for the truth, and no one would rest until that truth was silenced. As the city lights blurred behind them, one thing became certain: the chase was just beginning. And there was no way of knowing how far it would go. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The car swerved through the city streets, the sound of tires screeching on the wet pavement blending with the distant sirens that seemed to be growing louder by the second. Zoe's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. Elon's heart raced, but his mind was focused. They couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they had what they had. Behind them, the SUVs were relentless. The chase was on, and the world had just shifted in ways they couldn't fully comprehend yet. They were being hunted. The people they had exposed with their daring heist weren't the type to let something like this go unanswered. "We're almost there," Zoe muttered, as she took a sharp turn, narrowly missing a streetlight. "The safe house is just up ahead." Elon looked out the window, watching as the city blurred around them. His mind was racing. They had the data. The secrets of the elite. But what would they do with it? How would they make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands? How could they trust anyone when the entire system seemed stacked against them? "Once we're inside, we need to figure out our next move," Elon said, glancing over at Zoe. "We can't stay here long. The longer we stay put, the easier it is for them to track us." Zoe nodded but said nothing. She was too focused on driving, her foot heavy on the gas pedal. She knew how to stay calm under pressure, how to think a few steps ahead. But this was a whole new level of danger. They weren't just fighting a faceless enemy anymore. They were up against a system, a global web of influence that had been in place for decades. And now, they were caught in the center of it. As they approached the alley where the safe house was hidden, Zoe swerved into the narrow entrance and killed the engine. The car coasted to a stop in front of a dilapidated building that blended into the shadows. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than an abandoned warehouse, but to those who knew, it was a sanctuary, a place to regroup and plan. Elon stepped out first, scanning the street for any sign of pursuit. The coast was clear, for now. But they didn't have much time. He motioned for Zoe to follow him, and together they made their way to the side door, which opened with a soft click after Zoe entered a security code. Inside, the safe house was stark and utilitarian, bare walls, minimal furnishings, and a few high-tech gadgets scattered around the room. There was no luxury here, just the necessities for survival. The lights flickered on, revealing a small team of people who had been waiting for them. Some were old allies, others new faces. Each of them had their own role to play in this growing rebellion. Zoe, Elon, a man in his late 30s said, stepping forward. "We were beginning to think you weren't going to make it." His name was James, a former tech expert who had turned whistleblower and was now working with their team to expose the corruption. "We made it," Zoe said, her voice calm despite the chaos they had just escaped. "But we're not out of the woods yet. We need to move quickly." James nodded. "I've been monitoring the local networks. They know you're here. They'll be closing in soon. You need to get the data out to a secure server before they trace it back to us." Elon placed the small bag on the table, his hands momentarily trembling as he unzipped it and pulled out the encrypted drive. He had thought he was ready for this, but holding the key to such massive corruption in his hands felt heavier than he had imagined. "We've got the intel," Elon said, his voice steady but his mind reeling. "It's all on this drive. But we need to figure out how to get it to the right people. Let's start by figuring out who we can trust," Zoe said, her gaze moving around the room. "We need a strategy. We need to make sure this doesn't fall into the wrong hands. If we're not careful, it'll be buried before anyone gets the chance to see it." As the team gathered around the table, Elon felt the weight of what they were about to do. The secrets contained in that drive could change everything. It could bring down the global elites, expose corruption at the highest levels of government and business, and possibly even reshape society itself. But it could also bring ruin. If they weren't careful, it could destroy everything they had worked for. "We don't have much time," James said, interrupting Elon's thoughts. "We need to decide who gets access to this data and how we're going to distribute it." Zoe looked at Elon, her expression hardening. "We've been working with a small group of journalists, people we trust. But it's a delicate operation. If we don't play our cards right, this could all blow up in our faces." Elon exhaled slowly. The gravity of the situation was setting in. The data had to be protected. It had to be distributed in such a way that it couldn't be silenced. But who could they trust in a world so full of deception? "We start by making sure the data is mirrored," Elon said. "Multiple copies. If we lose one, we need to have others ready to go. We distribute it across secure servers that can't be easily traced." James nodded, typing rapidly on a laptop. "Got it. I'll get the encryption keys set up and make sure everything is properly backed up. But that's not going to stop them from trying to track you down." "I know," Elon said grimly. "But we can't let them scare us. We've come this far. We can't back down now." Zoe stepped forward, her face set in determination. "We need to move the data to a decentralized network. It's the only way to make sure they can't shut us down." "Agreed," Elon replied, his mind racing through the possibilities. They needed to outsmart their pursuers, stay one step ahead. It wouldn't be easy. But they couldn't afford to make mistakes. If they did, everything they had fought for would be lost. As the team began working on the logistics, Elon took a moment to step away from the group. He needed to think. The reality of what they had uncovered, what they were now a part of, was sinking in. The lives of countless people, the future of a system built on corruption, it was all hanging in the balance. And yet, the thing that kept nagging at him wasn't the data or the system they were fighting against, it was the dog. Astro. Elon had trusted Astro's signal to lead them here, to guide them to the truth. He had always felt a strange connection to the dog, as if Astro knew something that he didn't. Something more than just the data. For a moment, Elon allowed himself to think about it. But then, he pushed the thought aside. There was no time for distractions. Not now. Not when they were this close. The stakes had never been higher, and the enemies they were facing were more dangerous than anything they had imagined. The battle was only just beginning. But as long as the data was safe, as long as they stayed one step ahead, there was still hope. The safe house buzzed with the low hum of electronic activity, a quiet but urgent atmosphere filling the air. The team worked diligently, each member laser-focused on their task, trying to ensure that nothing went wrong. But even as they worked, Elon couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. He had known it would be hard to trust anyone when they embarked on this mission, but the weight of the data they held, secrets that could break entire empires, made trust even harder to come by. He turned his attention back to the encrypted drive, which was now plugged into a secure workstation. James, the tech expert, was rapidly typing, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens as he worked to mirror the data and encrypt it further. Elon stood off to the side, watching, unable to sit still. "We have to be quick," James said, his voice tense but controlled. "The moment this goes out, they'll be all over us. Every server, every network, it's all vulnerable." Elon's jaw tightened. He had spent his entire life working in tech, building and breaking systems. But nothing had prepared him for the scope of what they were now trying to accomplish. The information they'd stolen had the potential to change the world, but with that power came enormous risk. The wrong person getting their hands on it could lead to the complete collapse of everything they were trying to build. "We're almost done with the encryption," James added. "But there's something I think you should see." Elon moved closer to James, who was now pulling up a set of files on one of the monitors. The files were filled with names, codes, and documents, things Elon had expected, but there was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The files weren't just about corruption in high places, they weren't just about criminal enterprises or international conspiracies. There, in the midst of it all, was one file that caught Elon's attention, Astro's signal. A photo flashed on the screen. It was of a dog. But not just any dog, it was Astro. The dog that had been his companion for years, the one who had mysteriously led him on this entire journey, had somehow been involved in all of this. The realization hit Elon like a ton of bricks. "What is this?" Elon whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why is Astro here? What the hell is going on?" James looked up, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know, Elon. But it looks like Astro's more involved in all this than we thought. Whoever's behind this, they know about the dog. They know about you." The room grew heavy with the silence that followed. Zoe, who had been talking to one of the other operatives in the back corner of the safe house, turned and walked over. Her eyes scanned the screen, and her face darkened as she took in the sight of Astro's image on the monitor. "Elon, we're not just up against a bunch of corrupt elites," she said, her voice low and serious. "This is bigger than we realized. Whoever is pulling the strings has been watching you, watching all of us. And it's not just about the data anymore. It's about who you are, what you represent. That dog, whatever connection you have to it, it's no coincidence." Elon ran his fingers through his hair, trying to process what Zoe was saying. "But how does Astro fit into this? I've always thought the dog was just a good companion. A reminder of something I couldn't quite remember. But now, this is crazy. I don't know, Zoe admitted, but we need to figure it out. Fast. If someone is tracking Astro, if they know you're involved, then they know exactly where we are right now. Elon's heart skipped a beat. Zoe was right. They had only just uncovered the tip of the iceberg. Every step they had taken in the last few days, every plan, every escape, could have been tracked. Whoever was behind this had already anticipated their every move. And now, with the data nearly ready to go, they had to figure out how to protect it, and themselves, before it was too late. The team continued working, but the air had thickened. The weight of the secrets they were carrying was heavy, and now it seemed like every passing second brought them closer to an inevitable confrontation with the powerful forces trying to take it all back. What's the plan? Elon asked, his voice more urgent than before. We can't keep hiding. We need to get the data out, but we can't do it here. We need a safer route. Zoe nodded, her eyes already darting between the team members. We've been working on a few options. There's a journalist who's been reporting on these elites. She's been vocal about their corruption for years, and if anyone can spread this to the masses, it's her. But getting it to her is the problem. We'll need a secure connection, one that can't be traced back to us. That's risky, Elon said. She could be compromised, just like everyone else. We need to think this through. I agree, Zoe said, her tone unwavering. But right now, we don't have many choices. This data can't stay in our hands for long. We'll have to trust her, or someone like her. James piped in, still furiously typing. I can set up a secure relay. If we feed the data through multiple relays, we can minimize the chances of anyone intercepting it. It'll take a little while to get everything in place, but it's our best shot. Elon looked at the screen again, where Astro's image still lingered. We don't have much time, James. If the elites are as powerful as we think, they've already figured out where we are. They'll be here soon. We need to move. Zoe was already grabbing her bag and pulling out a set of satellite phones. I'll set up contact with the journalist. We don't know who we can trust in the shadows, but this woman has a reputation. I'll keep it brief, let her know we're sending the data her way. As she spoke, James was already coordinating the encryption and backup process. Elon stood by, pacing back and forth, his mind still spinning. The pieces were falling into place, but there were too many questions, too many unknowns. How had Astro become entangled in this? Why had the elites been watching him so closely? And, perhaps most pressing of all, how would they survive the storm that was closing in? We're ready, James said suddenly, breaking Elon from his thoughts. The relay is set up. All we need is the go-ahead. Elon looked over at Zoe, who was holding the phone in her hand, ready to make the call. She nodded grimly. Do it, Elon said, his voice steady. Send it out. As the data began its journey through the secure channels, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to uncover, so many more dangers ahead. But now, there was no turning back. The fight for the truth had only just begun. And they would do whatever it took to see it through. The moment the data began its transmission, the air in the safe house seemed to grow heavier. The faint whir of computers working in the background became a constant hum, like the steady beat of a heart. Zoe, Elon, and the rest of the team stood in silence, waiting. The waiting was always the hardest part, but now it was more than just the calm before the storm. It was the calm before the world would change forever. Elon paced the room, his mind racing. Every step seemed to echo in the otherwise still air. He couldn't shake the sense that something was closing in on them, something unseen but ever-present. Even though the data was securely sent, there was no guarantee the authorities wouldn't track it back to them. Zoe broke the silence first, her voice low and steady. The journalist is ready. She'll be broadcasting the data once she's got everything. We'll have a small window to get out of here, but we need to keep moving. The elites will be on high alert now. Elon nodded, trying to push the anxiety from his mind. Right. We need to keep our heads low. Stay off the radar. But even as he spoke the words, a feeling of unease washed over him. This wasn't just a typical high-stakes mission anymore. This was a war, one that stretched far beyond any of their previous operations. They had uncovered a network of corruption that was so deep and so entrenched in every level of society, it was impossible to know who could be trusted. James was the next to speak, breaking Elon from his thoughts. We've already initiated a backup protocol. If the elites get wind of the data, they'll try to shut it down fast. But we've spread it across several secure servers. It's going to be hard for them to erase it completely. That's good, but it's not enough, Elon said, his mind still reeling. They'll figure out a way. They always do. The door behind them creaked open, and one of their team members, a quiet and resourceful woman named Maya, walked in. Her expression was grim. They're here, she said simply. The first wave of search teams has arrived. They're scouring the city. We're compromised. Elon's pulse quickened. It was happening faster than he had anticipated. The elites weren't wasting any time. How long until they get here, he asked. Not long, Maya replied. We need to move. The clock's ticking. Zoe's eyes locked with Elon's, her gaze unwavering. We can't stay here. We need a safe route out. James stood up, quickly typing on his laptop. I've been monitoring their communications. They've triangulated your position, Elon. We've got less than an hour before they pinpoint this location. Damn it, Elon muttered, running a hand through his hair. This was no longer a game. They were under fire from every direction. Zoe turned to the team. Grab everything. We're heading out. We'll use the back exit and head to the secondary location. It's remote, but we'll be safe for a while. Elon felt a pang of doubt, but he didn't voice it. Instead, he grabbed his bag, checking once more to ensure the encrypted drive was safely stored. This was it, the point of no return. The team moved quickly, loading up their gear, grabbing supplies, and heading to the back exit. The safe house was quiet now, but Elon could feel the tension in the air. They were all walking a razor-thin line between safety and disaster. And that line was getting thinner by the minute. As they emerged into the alleyway behind the building, the first raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. It wasn't the weather that unsettled Elon, it was the sense of urgency in the air. Every footstep was amplified in the stillness of the night, every distant siren a reminder of how close they were to being caught. We need to move fast, Zoe said, her voice sharp but controlled. James, Maya, you're on lookout. The rest of us will head toward the safe route. The group split into smaller units, each person slipping into the shadows as they made their way toward the backup location. It wasn't long before they reached a dilapidated van parked near a narrow street, hidden from view. The van was their transport, the one piece of equipment that could get them out of the city and into a safe zone. James and Maya climbed into the front seats, taking control of navigation and security. Elon and Zoe sat in the back, along with a few other members of the team. As the van lurched forward, the rain continued to pour, its rhythmic sound masking the tension in the air. Elon's mind raced, but he didn't speak. The further they moved into the city's outskirts, the less he knew who they could trust. It was a game of survival now. They had the data. They had the evidence. But was that enough to take down the empire that ruled them? Was it enough to ensure that the truth would be heard? The van took a series of turns, moving deeper into unknown parts of the city, until they reached an industrial area on the edge of town. The buildings were abandoned, their windows broken, and the streets deserted. It was the perfect place to lay low. Zoe leaned forward, her voice quiet. We'll set up camp here. We can't risk using any networks for now. We wait for the journalist to confirm the data is out, and then we make our next move. Elon nodded. His stomach churned. They were in the belly of the beast now, the point where their actions would either ignite a revolution or lead to their downfall. There was no middle ground. As the van came to a stop, the team immediately began to unload. They set up camp in an abandoned building, one that appeared to have been a storage facility in the past. It was dark, silent, and had only the faintest traces of being used. For now, it would serve its purpose. Zoe paced the room, her eyes scanning every corner, every exit. Elon watched her, wondering if she was feeling the same weight of responsibility he was. They had come so far, but how much farther could they go? He thought back to the earlier moments, when Astro's image had flashed across the screen. That dog had somehow become the key to everything. But what did it all mean? Why was it so important that the elites knew about Astro? And what role had the dog played in everything? Elon was about to voice his concerns when Zoe interrupted his thoughts. I've got news, she said, her voice low but urgent. The journalist received the data. It's live. The world is about to see what we've uncovered. Elon's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment of truth. There was no going back now. Do you think they'll go public with it? Elon asked, his voice tight. Zoe nodded. She doesn't have a choice now. The data is out there. The elites are going to come after her too. But that's not our problem anymore. Elon felt a mix of relief and dread. The world would know the truth, but it was only the beginning. If the elites wanted to silence them, they would have to do it quickly. But what if they couldn't? What if the revolution had already begun? Now we wait, Zoe said, her voice steady. And pray it's enough. The hours in the abandoned building dragged on, and Elon found it nearly impossible to sleep. The adrenaline from their narrow escape, coupled with the weight of the information they had released to the public, kept his mind in constant motion. He couldn't shut off the questions swirling in his head, questions about Astro, about the elites, and about what this new reality meant for them all. The team had settled in as best they could, setting up makeshift beds and keeping an eye on the surrounding area. The rain outside continued to hammer against the windows, a constant reminder of the uncertainty hanging over them. But in the quiet, Elon could almost hear the ticking of a clock, counting down the time before the elites would make their move. Zoe sat across from him, eyes scanning the screen of a satellite phone. Her expression was unreadable, but Elon could tell she was on edge. She had been ever since they made the decision to go public with the data. The silence between them spoke volumes. There was no comfort in the waiting, no assurance that they would make it out of this alive. How long until the journalist's broadcast hits the mainstream? Elon asked, breaking the quiet tension. He knew the answer already, but asking gave him something to focus on, a tether to reality. Zoe's eyes flickered up from her phone for a brief moment before she replied. It's live. She's broadcasting it now. The world will know the truth in a matter of minutes. Elon's pulse quickened. This was it. They had pushed the button, and there was no going back. The data was out there, and the elites would waste no time in attempting to erase it, or worse, to come after those responsible. The risks had never been higher. As if on cue, Maya entered the room, her face pale, her eyes wide. They're moving in faster than we thought. I just intercepted a communication, they know exactly where we are. They've already sent a hit squad to the outskirts of the city. Elon's stomach dropped. He had known this moment would come, but hearing the words out loud made it all the more real. They were running out of time. Are we still on track? Zoe asked, her voice steady, though there was a tension in her posture that Elon recognized. She was holding it together, but barely. Maya nodded, her fingers flying over her own phone. The backup routes are secure for now, but they're closing in fast. We've got about 20 minutes before they reach our location. Elon stood, his mind already shifting into survival mode. Then we move. Now. There's no more waiting. Zoe looked up, her expression hardening. I'll take the lead. James, Maya, you're with me. Elon, you and the others, get the supplies ready. We're heading to the secondary location. The urgency in her voice left no room for hesitation. Elon grabbed his bag and threw it over his shoulder, checking one last time to ensure the encrypted drive was secure. They had done everything they could to hide the data, but there was no guarantee it would remain safe. The elites had a way of tracking down everything, even the things that seemed untraceable. The team quickly mobilized, moving with precision honed by years of covert operations. As they exited the building, the rain seemed to intensify, the sound of it pounding against the rooftops and streets an ominous soundtrack to their escape. The safe house was no longer an option, they had to get out of the city, and fast. The secondary location was several miles away, deep in a remote area that had once been a military base, now abandoned and forgotten. If they could make it there, they would be safe, at least for a while. But the path to safety was fraught with danger. Every turn they took, every shadow they passed, could hide a threat. They moved through the alleyways and side streets, sticking to the shadows, always one step ahead of the hit squad sent to find them. The city was eerily quiet at this hour, and Elon couldn't help but wonder if the calm was a sign of something worse to come. Zoe, Maya, and James led the way, their eyes sharp and their movements swift. Elon kept pace with the rest of the team, his thoughts racing. As much as he wanted to focus on the task at hand, his mind kept returning to the same question: what did Astro have to do with all of this? He had never thought of the dog as more than a companion, a loyal friend who had been by his side through thick and thin. But now, seeing Astro's image in those files, hearing about the elite's obsession with him, it felt like there was something far bigger at play. Something he couldn't yet comprehend. They reached the edge of the city, the buildings beginning to thin out as they neared the outskirts. The night felt colder now, and the air seemed to hang heavier with every step. They had almost made it to the vehicle that would take them to the secondary location when a distant sound caught their attention. Footsteps. Rapid and purposeful. Elon froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're here," Maya hissed, her eyes scanning the shadows. "We don't have much time." Zoe didn't hesitate. "Move. Now." They took off in a sprint, ducking down alleyways and cutting across vacant lots. The team's movements were coordinated, fluid, like a well-practiced dance of survival. Elon's mind raced as they approached the vehicle, but every part of him was screaming that they weren't going to make it in time. The sound of sirens began to fill the air, growing louder by the second. Their time was running out. Just as they neared the van, a barrage of gunfire erupted from behind them, the sound of bullets hitting the pavement sending them scattering for cover. "Go! Go!" Zoe shouted, as James and Maya jumped into the front seats of the van, their hands already working the ignition. Elon, along with the rest of the team, dove into the back, slamming the door shut as the van lurched forward. The city lights blurred in the rearview mirror as they sped away, the sound of gunfire fading into the distance. For a brief moment, Elon allowed himself to breathe. But even as the van hurtled down the highway, he couldn't escape the feeling that the real battle had just begun. They had made it out of the city for now, but the elites weren't going to let them go that easily. And the dog, Astro, still lingered in the back of his mind. There was something more to this, something they hadn't uncovered yet. Whatever it was still out there, waiting to reveal itself. And Elon Musk would have to face it head-on. The van's tires screeched as it sped down the winding road, racing through the dark, desolate landscape. The rain had finally eased, but the tension was still thick in the air. Elon sat at the back of the van, eyes fixed on the view outside, though his mind was elsewhere. There was a knot in his stomach, something wasn't right. The feeling had started in the safe house and hadn't left him since. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead as Zoe, sitting in the front passenger seat, scanned the horizon, her eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. She'd been on edge ever since they left the city, every slight movement setting off her instincts. Maya and James, meanwhile, were silent, focused on the task at hand. Their eyes were sharp, the kind of sharpness that comes with years of knowing that survival means staying one step ahead. Elon pulled out his encrypted tablet, his fingers hovering over the screen. The journalist had confirmed the data was out. The world would be waking up to the truth in a matter of hours. Yet even with that small victory, the weight of the situation remained unbearable. The elites had known about the leak within minutes of it going live, and they had moved faster than he'd anticipated. "What's the status on the secondary location?" Elon asked, breaking the heavy silence. His voice sounded hollow, even to him. Zoe turned her gaze toward him briefly before returning her attention to the road. "We're about 10 minutes out. The place is remote. It was used as a staging area during the last few operations. Should be secure, at least for the time being." "Should be," Elon muttered under his breath, frustrated. He didn't want "should be" when lives were at stake. He wanted certainty. In their world, nothing was guaranteed. Not even the things that seemed like safety nets. The van's engine hummed as they drove further into the countryside. It was a long stretch of empty, industrial land, barely populated, the ideal place to lay low and regroup. But even as they neared the location, Elon couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they weren't alone. Suddenly, a flash of light caught his eye, too quick to make sense of it. The light flickered on the horizon before disappearing. "Did anyone else see that?" Elon asked, sitting up straighter. His heart was racing again. Zoe's hand instinctively reached for the radio, but she stopped herself just before turning it on. "I saw it too," she said. "Stay alert." James adjusted his seat, reaching for a small device tucked into the compartment. "It could be a signal, a way to track us. Or worse, it could be a warning." Maya, sitting next to James, turned her head sharply. "We've been compromised," she muttered. "Someone's monitoring our movements." Elon's stomach churned. The reality of their situation was setting in. This wasn't just about getting the data out. They were being hunted. And the hunters were much closer than they realized. "We can't keep running," Elon said, his voice filled with resolve. "We need to turn the tables. We need to make them chase us." Zoe glanced over at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Elon felt a sense of urgency building within him. "They think they have the upper hand. But they're wrong. We've got the truth. And we've got Astro." He paused, knowing his words would carry weight. "If they want to play this game, we'll give them a fight they didn't see coming." Zoe's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting we use the dog, again?" Elon nodded. "Not just Astro. We've got the data, we've got the networks. But we've also got something they're underestimating. The dog could be the key to exposing everything. If we tie it back to the elites, if we show them how deep their control runs, it could change everything." Maya and James exchanged a look, and then Maya spoke up, her voice hesitant. "You really think it's going to work? They've got the whole system at their disposal. Do we have a choice?" Elon retorted, the question hanging in the air. There were no easy answers, no perfect solutions. But there was one thing that remained true: the elites had underestimated them from the start. And that could be their downfall. Before anyone could respond, the van swerved violently, jolting them all from their seats. Tires screeched as the vehicle spun, narrowly avoiding a large barricade that had been set up in the middle of the road. "What the hell?" Zoe shouted, her hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to regain control. A figure emerged from the darkness, illuminated by the headlights, another van, its engine roaring as it closed in on them. Behind the wheel was a man dressed in tactical gear, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. He didn't need to speak. His intention was clear. "This is it," Elon said, his voice low but steady. "Get ready." Zoe slammed her foot on the gas, pushing the van forward as it swerved past the roadblock. The other vehicle followed, relentless in its pursuit. The chase had begun. The wind whipped through the cracked windows as the two vans tore down the rain-slicked road, kicking up mud and debris. Zoe swerved again, narrowly missing an oncoming tree. The tension was unbearable. Each turn could be their last. James pulled a small device from his pocket and held it up. "I can jam their signals temporarily. It might buy us a few seconds." "Do it," Elon ordered. The hum of electronics filled the van as James worked his device, and for a brief moment, the pursuer's headlights flickered. But it didn't last long. The other van quickly recovered, and they were back on their tail. Elon's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them forever. They needed to turn the tables, but how? Then, an idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. He turned to Zoe. "Head for the old rail yard, just ahead on the right. There's a tunnel system there." Zoe didn't hesitate. "Got it." She swerved sharply to the right, the van fishtailing as they veered onto a narrow, winding path that led into an industrial rail yard. The towering, rusted metal of old trains loomed in the dark, like silent witnesses to the chaos. The tunnel system was just ahead, a forgotten underpass that once served the old train lines. If they could make it inside, they could disappear from sight and take a breath. They needed to get to the secondary location before the elites closed in. The van slid into the tunnel entrance, the screech of its tires echoing off the damp walls. As they disappeared into the darkness, the sound of the pursuing van faded. Elon allowed himself a small, relieved breath. They weren't out of danger yet, but for now, they had gained a slight edge. "We've got a few minutes," Zoe said, her voice tense but controlled. "Everyone, stay sharp." Elon turned back to look at the others. James and Maya were already assessing their next move. The plan was to wait it out, let the storm pass. But Elon knew better than anyone, nothing ever went as planned. The elites were relentless, and the game had just begun. "Keep the comms open," he said, his voice steady. "We're not out of the woods yet." And somewhere in the distance, beyond the rain and the chaos, a clock was ticking. The world was waiting for the truth. And they had no idea just how dangerous the truth could be. The tunnel was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of old metal and earth. The van's engine hummed softly as it idled in the dim light, the only sound aside from the distant roar of the storm above. Elon sat with his back pressed against the cool, rusted wall of the tunnel, staring ahead, his mind racing. This was the calm before the storm. They had escaped one danger, but he knew this was far from over. The elites weren't just going to give up. And the data they had released, it was far too valuable for them to let it slip away without a fight. "We need to get to the secondary location, and fast," Zoe said, breaking the silence. She had kept a cool demeanor up until now, but even she couldn't hide the strain in her voice. Maya was sitting on the edge of the van, checking her gear. "The rain's let up, but it's still too risky to move until we're sure the area's clear. We need to wait for the heat to die down." Elon didn't respond immediately. His thoughts were still locked on Astro. The dog had been a symbol of something more than just loyalty. He had been their beacon, the unexpected key to unraveling everything. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Astro was more connected to this conspiracy than anyone realized. If the elites were so desperate to protect him, then there was something more at play. "Zoe, do you have any updates on the data leak?" Elon finally asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Zoe turned to face him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her screen. "It's all over the internet. The journalist did what we asked. She made sure the elites were named. She even hinted at the dog's role. It's getting traction, but they've already started discrediting it. They'll fight back hard. Elon, Maya interjected, her voice cautious, we need to focus on what comes next. The elites aren't going to just sit back and let this slide. We need to get out of here and regroup. Elon took a deep breath. They were right. Staying in the tunnel too long was a risk, but moving too quickly wasn't the answer either. Their next move had to be precise, calculated. We're not leaving until we know they can't track us. We've got to lose them for good. James, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I've been running some calculations. If we split up and take different routes, we might be able to throw them off. But we'll need to keep in constant contact. Zoe nodded in agreement. We're not splitting up unless we absolutely have to. Right now, we need to stay as one unit. The moment we break apart, they'll have the advantage. Elon knew they couldn't afford to split up. The elites had too many resources, too much influence. They were too skilled at tracking people who dared to challenge their grip on power. Together, they had a fighting chance. Apart, they'd be easy prey. We'll move as one, Elon decided, clapping his hands together. Maya, can you get us a map of the area? I want to see the most direct route to the secondary location, but also any possible alternatives. Maya nodded and immediately pulled up a map on her tablet, zooming in on their location and highlighting potential routes. This is the best path, she said, pointing to a thin trail that snaked through the woods ahead. We can take this to avoid the main roads. It'll be slower, but it'll keep us under the radar. Zoe leaned in to take a look, studying the map closely. It's risky, but it's the best we've got. We'll need to move fast and keep our eyes peeled for any signs of a tail. Elon glanced at his watch. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. The elites would have already made their move, and they were likely tracking their every step. If they didn't act soon, they would be surrounded. Let's go, he said, his voice firm. We move in 5 minutes. Everyone prepare and make sure your equipment is secure. The team wasted no time, gathering their belongings and double-checking their weapons. As they moved toward the back of the van, Elon's thoughts drifted back to the data they had released. It wasn't just about exposing the elites anymore. It was about taking back control of their lives, and the lives of everyone who had been unknowingly manipulated. Astro had been a part of this story long before they realized it. The dog wasn't just a companion, he was a symbol of something far more profound. Elon couldn't explain it, but he knew that the elite's obsession with the dog had a deeper meaning. Perhaps Astro was a key to understanding how the elites had maintained their power for so long. And if they could uncover that secret, they might just have the weapon they needed to take them down. The rain had stopped completely now, and the air felt fresher, though it carried an ominous chill. Elon stood outside the van, taking a deep breath. They had a long road ahead, and the fight was far from over. Ready? Zoe asked, her voice steady as she looked at each of them in turn. Everyone nodded. They were ready. As they made their way toward the woods, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much bigger than they had ever imagined. Every step they took brought them closer to the truth, and to the people who would do anything to keep it hidden. They entered the woods, moving in silence, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows in the dim light. The tension was palpable. Every step could be the last. Suddenly, Maya stopped, raising a hand to signal the others. There's something up ahead, she whispered. Elon's heart skipped a beat. His instincts kicked in, and he crouched low, signaling to the team to take cover. The woods were quiet, eerily so, and for a moment, Elon thought it was just his imagination running wild. Then, he saw it. A figure moved through the trees, slowly, deliberately. A man. Dressed in black. He wasn't alone. We're being hunted, Zoe said quietly, her eyes narrowing as she watched the figure in the distance. Elon's pulse quickened. The elites were closing in faster than they thought. They had to make their move now. "Stay close," he whispered. "We're not running anymore. We're going to face this head-on." They couldn't hide anymore. They would fight. And they would expose the truth, no matter the cost. The shadows grew longer as the team huddled together, crouched low among the trees, their eyes trained on the figures ahead. The forest was dense, the moonlight barely breaking through the canopy above, casting a dim glow on the wet ground beneath their feet. The eerie quiet of the woods was only broken by the occasional rustling of leaves, and the distant crack of twigs underfoot. They were outnumbered, but they couldn't afford to retreat. This was it, the moment of truth. "How many?" Elon whispered to Maya, who had her eyes narrowed as she scanned the terrain ahead. "At least 3, Maya responded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had her rifle slung across her chest, her eyes constantly darting between the figures moving in the distance. "Maybe more, but I can't be sure yet." Elon didn't need to hear more. He already knew what was at stake. The elites were closing in, and it was becoming clear that they were no longer playing games. This wasn't about capturing a few key players, it was about eliminating anyone who threatened their control. And right now, they were the biggest threat. He turned to Zoe, who was checking her pistol one last time. "We need to find a way to separate them. We can't let them surround us." Zoe nodded without saying a word. She understood the gravity of the situation. If they didn't split their forces, they would be pinned down and overwhelmed. They had one chance to survive, and that was to keep moving, to stay unpredictable. "James," Elon said, his voice calm but urgent. "You take the rear with Maya. Use the trees as cover and watch for any movement. Zoe and I will head forward. We'll draw their attention." James gave a sharp nod, pulling the hood of his jacket tighter around his face. "Got it. Stay safe." Maya didn't say anything, but the set of her jaw showed she was ready. They had no other choice now. It was fight or flight. Elon's heart was pounding in his chest, but he knew he couldn't hesitate. The data they had released, the truth they had brought to light, it had already set the wheels in motion. But it was also the spark that had lit the firestorm. The elites had their eyes on them, and they weren't going to stop until they had erased every trace of the truth. "We move on my count," Elon said, his eyes scanning the figures ahead. They were getting closer. The moment of ambush was approaching. Zoe gave him a brief nod, her fingers tight around her weapon, ready to strike. "Let's do this." 3, 2, 1, Elon barely whispered the last number before springing into action. He darted forward, his footsteps light but quick. Zoe was right behind him. They made their way through the trees, carefully staying low and using the shadows to their advantage. Elon's mind raced, mapping out every possible escape route, every vantage point that might help them survive. Their attackers would likely have the same plans, but Elon trusted the team. They had worked too hard, too long, to let it all fall apart now. Ahead, one of the figures finally broke from the shadows. It was a tall man in black tactical gear, moving deliberately, scanning the woods. Elon's breath caught in his throat. There was no doubt, this was an elite hunter, trained for these kinds of situations. They weren't dealing with amateurs. The figure stopped suddenly, his head jerking in their direction. For a split second, Elon froze, his heart skipping a beat. Had they been spotted? Then the man turned back around, as if he hadn't noticed anything unusual. It was only a momentary lapse, but it gave them the time they needed. Elon signaled to Zoe, and they moved quickly, slipping into the trees once more. But as they crept through the underbrush, something shifted. The entire atmosphere felt wrong. There was a feeling in the air, something they couldn't explain. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. A gunshot rang out in the distance, the crack of the bullet cutting through the tension like a knife. Elon's head whipped toward the sound. It came from James and Maya's direction. "James!" Elon shouted, panic rising in his throat. "I'm okay." James called back. His voice was strained, but steady. "They're trying to flank us. We're not alone." Zoe cursed under her breath. "I knew it. They've got more men. We need to move, now." Elon's mind worked at lightning speed. He had to think. He had to act fast. They couldn't let themselves be surrounded. If they stayed in one place too long, they'd be sitting ducks. But there was something else at play. Something that went beyond just being cornered. "Astro," Elon muttered under his breath. Zoe shot him a confused look. "What?" "The dog," Elon said, his voice firm. "He's not just a pet. He's more important than any of us realized. He's a signal, a symbol, something the elites can't afford to lose. We need to use that. We need to bait them into making a mistake." Zoe blinked, clearly processing the shift in direction. "Are you telling me we're going to use the dog to draw them in? That's insane." "It's our best shot," Elon said. "Astro is connected to everything. He's the one piece the elites have been trying to control, and they've failed. We're going to make them come for him. And when they do, we strike." The plan was reckless, dangerous, and insane, but in that moment, it was the only thing that felt right. "All right," Zoe said, exhaling a deep breath. "We're doing this. Let's bring them in." The four of them regrouped, gathering at the base of a massive oak tree. Elon pulled out a small device from his pack, a tracker that could be used to draw out the dog. With a swift motion, he activated it, and moments later, a signal popped up on his screen. The dog's location. The elites would come for Astro. They had no choice but to take the bait. "Stay sharp," Elon said, his voice low. "The trap is set. Now we wait." And as the seconds ticked by, the quiet of the forest seemed to grow even more suffocating. They were waiting for something to happen, something big. They had no idea if it would work, but in this moment, it was their only option. Then, in the distance, a new sound cut through the stillness, a bark. A familiar, sharp bark. Astro had given them a sign. And with that, the final battle was about to begin. The barking echoed through the dense forest, sharp and insistent, like a war cry from the depths of the woods. Elon's heart hammered in his chest as he locked eyes with Zoe, who looked as tense as he felt. They were no longer in control of the situation. They had set the trap, and now they were waiting for it to spring. But the anticipation was almost unbearable. The elites had fallen into the bait. They had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. No idea that the dog they were hunting wasn't just a pet but the key to everything. But now, they were coming, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim Astro. "Get ready," Elon muttered, his voice a low growl. He could hear their footsteps now, the crunch of leaves, the faint rustle of branches as they moved closer. They were closing in. He turned to the others. "Maya, James, stay in position. Zoe, you and I are going to make the first move. We'll draw them in, and you two hit them from the rear when the time comes. We can't let them escape." Zoe gave a sharp nod. "Got it. We stay tight and move fast." They knew the stakes. If they failed now, everything would be lost. They would lose Astro, the data, and maybe even their lives. In the distance, the barking grew louder, more frantic. It was a sound that was oddly reassuring, even if it signaled danger. It was a signal that Astro was alive, that he was out there, and that they hadn't failed yet. Elon's thoughts raced. He couldn't stop thinking about how everything had led to this moment. The conspiracy, the dog, the elites, Astro had been the unexpected link between it all. They had uncovered the truth, and now the elites were coming for him, desperate to keep their secrets buried. But they underestimated the power of the team they had assembled. "Move out," Elon whispered. Zoe and Elon sprinted toward the clearing ahead, their movements synchronized and deliberate. The rain had picked up again, a light mist falling from the sky, but they didn't care. They were too focused on the task at hand. Every footstep, every breath counted. As they neared the clearing, they could see the figures of the elites, their dark clothing blending in with the shadows, but their movements unmistakable. There were 5 of them now, all heavily armed, all intent on finding the dog. And Astro was the only thing standing between them and victory. Zoe crouched low beside Elon. "We can't let them reach him," she said quietly, her eyes flicking from one figure to the next. "If they do, it's over." Elon nodded grimly. He knew what they had to do. The moment they were within range, Elon and Zoe burst into the clearing, weapons raised. The elites stopped in their tracks, startled by the sudden appearance of their enemies. "Hold it right there," Elon shouted, his voice firm. "We're not going anywhere until you tell us what you've been hiding." The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. His cold eyes studied Elon for a moment, a smirk playing at the edges of his lips. "You think you're in control, Musk? You've underestimated us." Elon didn't flinch. "No. I think you've underestimated me." There was a tense silence. The elite seemed to size them up, calculating their next move. Elon's heart pounded as he waited for the moment to strike. He knew they couldn't hesitate. This was it, their last chance to stop them. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire erupted from the trees behind them. James and Maya were making their move. Elon's pulse spiked, and he didn't waste a second. With a swift motion, he aimed his rifle at the man in front of him. "Stay down," he yelled, and without hesitation, he fired a warning shot into the air. The elites flinched, but they didn't back off. "Kill them," the scarred man ordered, and the elites lunged forward, guns raised. Time seemed to slow. Elon dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast of gunfire that rang out in the air. The bullet grazed his shoulder, the pain sharp and immediate. But there was no time to stop. They were in the middle of it now. Zoe was right beside him, firing at one of the men to their left. Her aim was deadly, and the man collapsed to the ground in a heap, his gun falling from his hands. But they were outnumbered. For every elite they took down, 2 more seemed to appear. The ambush was working, but it was also pushing them to the limit. Elon could feel the weight of the fight pressing on him, but he refused to back down. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. "Move. Get to the dog," Zoe shouted as she reloaded her gun, her eyes scanning the area for more threats. They pushed forward, darting through the trees toward the clearing where Astro had been hidden. The dog's bark was louder now, more urgent, as if he knew they were coming for him. Elon's heart skipped a beat as he saw the silhouette of the dog in the distance, standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the elites. "Almost there," Elon muttered through gritted teeth. But the scarred man wasn't far behind. He was closing in, a mad gleam in his eyes, ready to strike. Elon turned to face him, his gun raised. The man fired first, a shot aimed straight at Elon's chest. Elon ducked just in time, the bullet missing by inches. He wasn't going down without a fight. With a surge of energy, Elon lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. They struggled, hands locked, but Elon was driven by something stronger than pain or fear. He was driven by the need to protect Astro, to protect the truth that had cost them so much. With one final push, Elon managed to disarm the man, knocking his gun aside. The elite leader scrambled, but before he could react, Zoe appeared from behind, firing once, twice, and the man fell silent. "He's down," Zoe said, panting but resolute. Elon barely had time to process the victory before the dog, Astro, bounded toward him. He knelt down, his hands trembling as he reached for the dog, his heart swelling with relief. Astro nuzzled his face, as if to reassure him they had won, even if only for now. But the battle was far from over. Elon knew this was just the beginning. The elites would be back, and next time, they would come with everything they had. But for now, they had won. They had survived. And they had uncovered the truth. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Elon allowed himself a moment to breathe. "Let's go," he whispered, his voice steady. Together, they moved deeper into the woods, ready for whatever came next. And with Astro by their side, they knew they had a fighting chance. The night air was thick with tension as Elon and his team retreated into the woods, with Astro trotting ahead of them like a loyal sentinel. The battle had been fierce, and even though they had successfully taken down the elite forces in the immediate area, they knew that this was far from over. There was a war to fight, and they were just getting started. Elon glanced back at the others, his heart still racing from the adrenaline of the firefight. Maya had a small cut on her arm, and James had a bruise on his cheek, but both were determined, as always, not to show weakness. Zoe's face was as stone-cold as ever, but Elon could tell she was processing the weight of their situation. They were all changed now. No one could go through something like this and come out the same. "Is everyone all right?" Elon asked, his voice low but urgent. The group had slowed their pace to a cautious walk, still alert for any movement in the woods. "We're fine," Maya said, her voice steady despite the blood trickling from the gash on her arm. "We've got to keep moving. They're going to come after us harder next time." Elon nodded. She was right. The elites were relentless, and they'd already shown just how far they were willing to go to protect their secrets. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. Every step they took now had to be calculated. "We need to get to the cabin," Zoe said, her eyes scanning the trees. "It's the only place we're safe for now. But it's going to be a long walk, and we're exposed. We need to be smart about this." Elon turned to face her, his mind already working through the logistics. "Right. Let's move quickly but quietly. No more distractions." As they continued their journey, the weight of their discovery pressed on Elon's mind. The truth they had uncovered, the data they had extracted, was bigger than any of them had initially realized. The elites had controlled so much for so long, manipulating everything from technology to politics, all to maintain their grip on power. Astro had been their greatest asset, a secret weapon that tied everything together. They hadn't just been after the dog, they had been after the control it represented. But now, with the dog in their possession, the stakes had shifted. They were no longer running from the elites, they were running with the truth. "Elon," Zoe called, breaking him from his thoughts. "We need to talk about the next steps." Elon looked up at her, his brow furrowed. He had been so focused on getting them to safety that he hadn't stopped to consider what came after. The truth they had gathered could change everything, but only if they knew how to use it. And right now, they didn't have a clear plan. "I know," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the responsibility that had fallen on them. "But we can't afford to make any mistakes. The moment we stop, the moment we slip up, they'll find us. We need to keep moving." Zoe nodded, her lips tight as she processed his words. "We have the data. We have Astro. But it's not enough. The elites are too powerful. We're outgunned, outnumbered. We need more." "More?" Elon asked, his mind still reeling from the sheer scale of what they had uncovered. "What more could we possibly need? We have everything we need to take them down. The data, Astro, everything." Zoe shook her head. "You're missing the point. We have the pieces, but we don't have the support. The people who need to know this information, the ones who can help us, there's no way to reach them unless we have more leverage. We need allies, and we need to go public. We need to expose them all. Elon's heart skipped a beat. He knew Zoe was right, but the thought of going public with everything they had uncovered terrified him. The elites were powerful, and they would do anything to protect their interests. Exposing them could mean the end for everyone involved. We can't just tell the world, Elon said, his voice strained. If we do that, we'll be signing our own death warrants. We need to be strategic. I know, Zoe replied. But the longer we wait, the more they'll close in. The world deserves to know the truth, and we can't let them get away with it. Elon's mind raced as he considered their options. Zoe was right, they couldn't keep running forever. At some point, they had to take a stand. But the risks were enormous. If they exposed the truth, the elites would fight back with everything they had. It was a dangerous game they were playing, and there were no guarantees they would win. We'll need help, Elon said finally, his voice firm. But we can't trust just anyone. We need people who know what they're up against, people who have the resources to back us up. And we need to make sure we've covered our tracks. One mistake and the whole operation will be compromised. Zoe's eyes narrowed as she processed his words. I know a few people. People who might be able to help. But it's risky. If they're compromised, we're done. I'm willing to take the risk, Elon said. We've come this far. We can't stop now. For the first time in what felt like forever, the team moved with a sense of purpose. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. The cabin was still several miles ahead, but with each step, they felt the weight of their mission grow heavier. They had uncovered a conspiracy that stretched farther than any of them had imagined. They had the pieces to take down the elites, but now, they needed to play their cards carefully. As they neared the cabin, the tension was palpable. Elon's thoughts were consumed by the data they had. The truth was out there, but getting it into the right hands would be the challenge. He couldn't do it alone. Astro trotted at their side, ever watchful, as though sensing the danger that loomed ahead. But Elon knew the dog wasn't just a companion. Astro was their key to the future. He was the symbol of everything they had fought for. Once we get inside, we regroup, Elon said, his voice low. We make our next move from there. They reached the cabin, and as they stepped inside, the door creaked behind them, sealing them off from the world outside. It was a small, rustic place, tucked away in the wilderness, but it felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe. But the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Elon looked at his team, his eyes filled with resolve. We take the next step together. We expose them, and we change the world. And as the cabin door closed behind them, Elon knew that the final chapter of this story was about to unfold. The silence in the cabin was thick, a contrast to the chaotic moments that had led them here. The weight of their discovery, the responsibility of the mission, and the uncertainty of what was to come pressed down on Elon and his team. The dim glow of the cabin's lone light flickered as the storm outside continued to rage, battering the windows with rain and wind. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. Elon, Zoe said, her voice steady but tense. We can't afford to waste time. We know what they'll do next. They're going to send everything they have after us. I know, Elon replied, rubbing his eyes. Exhaustion had crept in, but there was no time to rest. They were on the cusp of something monumental, and there was no turning back. But we need to be careful. One wrong move, and everything we've worked for could go up in flames. Astro, curled up in the corner of the room, let out a soft whine, as if sensing the rising tension in the air. Elon couldn't help but feel a bond with the dog. Astro was no longer just a tool or a piece of the puzzle. He was a symbol of everything they stood for, truth, resistance, and the courage to fight back. James stepped forward, a grim expression on his face. We've got the data. But we need to make sure it gets into the right hands. If we expose it without the proper support, it's just going to be another conspiracy theory. We need to have a plan. Maya, still nursing her wound, nodded. We need leverage. Without it, we're just targets. We have to hit them where it hurts. Elon's mind raced. He'd been thinking about this non-stop since they had found the truth. The elites were powerful, entrenched in systems of control that had shaped the world for years. But the data they had gathered, if distributed correctly, could expose them for what they truly were. It wasn't just about taking them down, it was about waking the world up. Zoe was right. Going public was dangerous. But it was the only option that made sense. They had to make the elites see they couldn't control everything anymore. It had to be a move so bold, so impactful, that it would force them to expose their hand and finally crack under the pressure. Leverage, Elon repeated, his eyes glinting with determination. We need the world on our side. We need proof, something undeniable. The plan started to take shape in his mind. The data they had would expose the conspiracy for what it was, corruption at the highest level. But it wasn't enough just to release it into the public domain. They needed a way to ensure the message reached the right ears, to ensure the elites couldn't bury it like they had with so many others before. We'll take this to the media, Elon said finally, his voice ringing with conviction. We need to go straight to the press. But not just any press, somebody who has the influence to make this impossible to ignore. Zoe raised an eyebrow. You're talking about going public right now? After everything that's happened? Yes, Elon said firmly. It's the only way. We'll provide evidence, real, irrefutable evidence. We'll make sure the story hits every corner of the world. And when it does, the elites won't be able to hide. They won't have the power to control the narrative anymore. Zoe seemed to consider his words for a moment. And how do we guarantee that they don't come after us before we can get it out? We don't give them a choice, Elon replied. We make sure it's too big for them to ignore. We put the information in front of everyone, politicians, activists, ordinary citizens. And we do it fast. The plan was risky. If the elites caught wind of it before they could act, they would be in even more danger than before. But Elon knew that if they didn't take this chance, they might never get another. The clock was ticking. James, still looking skeptical, spoke up. You think the world is ready for something like this? People are going to be skeptical. They're going to need proof, and a lot of it. You think we have enough? We have the truth, Elon said, his voice low but resolute. That's all we need. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Elon and his team worked tirelessly to prepare the data for release. Maya, despite her injury, handled the encryption, ensuring that the information would reach only those who could handle it. Zoe worked on securing contacts with trusted journalists who had the means to disseminate the truth globally. James, meanwhile, set up secure communications to keep them ahead of the elite's inevitable attempt to track them down. As the final pieces of the plan fell into place, Elon felt a sense of finality settle over him. There was no turning back now. The storm outside raged louder, and it felt like a metaphor for the storm they were about to unleash. Everything set, Zoe said, her eyes locking with Elon's. Now we wait. Elon nodded. It's in the hands of the world now. They huddled together in the small cabin, each of them silently aware of the enormity of what they were about to do. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. But inside, there was a quiet resolve that filled the room. As the morning sun finally began to break through the clouds, a notification pinged on Elon's phone. The data had been released. The world would know the truth. It didn't take long for the first reports to surface. News outlets across the globe began to pick up the story, verifying the authenticity of the data. Social media exploded with outrage, disbelief, and shock. Politicians, business magnates, and ordinary citizens all began to rally, sharing the information and calling for justice. The elites who had thought themselves untouchable were now exposed for their corruption, their manipulation, and their control over everything from government to business. The world had awoken. But with the truth came inevitable consequences. The elites were not going to take this lying down. They had already begun to retaliate, sending out their forces to silence anyone involved. "We have to keep moving," Zoe said as they watched the chaos unfold on the screen. The fight's just begun. But for the first time, Elon felt a spark of hope. The battle wasn't over, but the world had shifted. The elites no longer controlled the narrative. The people had the power now. Elon looked at his team, at the faces of the people who had stood by him, who had risked everything for the truth. The road ahead would be long, but they had made their stand. "We've won the first battle," Elon said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Now, we finish what we started." And as the storm outside began to clear, the team knew they were ready for whatever came next. For the first time, they felt unstoppable. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?